You're not behind because life is unfair. You're behind because you keep negotiating with the version of yourself that already failed. Look at a normal day. You wake up with a clear intention, maybe to work, train, study, or fix something that's been slipping. Nothing dramatic. Just one decision you already know matters. And then it starts. You delay 10 minutes. Then you check something small. Then you tell yourself you'll do it later, when you feel sharper, more focused, more ready. By the time the day ends, you haven't failed loudly, you've just quietly postponed what would have moved you forward. That pattern repeats so subtly that you stop questioning it. But the result is not subtle. Weeks pass. Months pass. And now you look around and feel like everyone else is ahead. More stable. More consistent. More in control. The hard truth is this: you didn't fall behind in one moment, you drifted there through controlled, repeated hesitation. This isn't about motivation. It's not about working harder. It's about understanding why you keep choosing short-term comfort over long-term position, even when you know better. In this video, you're going to see exactly what's happening beneath your behavior, the hidden mechanisms that make you feel justified in slowing down, the internal patterns that quietly erase your progress, and the shift required to stop negotiating with yourself entirely. Because once you see it clearly, you won't be confused anymore. And once confusion is gone, responsibility becomes unavoidable. What's keeping you behind isn't lack of ability, it's a set of internal patterns that feel reasonable in the moment but destructive over time. There are 3 mechanisms running in the background. The first is quiet negotiation. You don't reject discipline outright, you reshape it. You tell yourself you'll start later, do less, or adjust the standard just enough to stay comfortable. It feels controlled. It feels intentional. But what you're actually doing is lowering the cost of inaction while convincing yourself you're still on track. The second is what psychologists call self-licensing bias. You do something small, answer emails, organize your space, make a plan, and then you subconsciously grant yourself permission to ease off. The effort gives you emotional credit, and you spend that credit by avoiding the harder task that actually matters. The third is the emotional fatigue loop. Not physical exhaustion, decision fatigue. Every time you hesitate, reconsider, or delay, you drain your ability to act decisively later. By the time you finally try to focus, your mental energy is already diluted. So you stop again, reinforcing the cycle. Here's how it plays out in real life. Someone decides to fix their financial situation. They research, watch videos, maybe even create a budget. That feels productive. But when it comes to actually tracking spending daily or cutting unnecessary expenses, they hesitate. I'll start fresh next week. That delay resets the entire process. The effort was real, but it wasn't directed at the point of change. These patterns don't look like failure. They look like preparation, adjustment, or rest. But together, they create one outcome: you stay in motion without moving forward. And until you see these mechanisms clearly, you'll keep repeating them because they don't feel like mistakes. They feel justified. It starts with something you rarely question: your habit of adjusting the standard instead of meeting it. You set a target. Something clear. Finish the report. Go to the gym. Stick to the budget. And at the beginning of the day, it feels fixed. Non-negotiable. But as the day unfolds, the standard begins to soften. Not all at once, gradually. You tell yourself doing half is still progress. You convince yourself timing doesn't matter as much as completion. You shift the goal just enough to make it easier to accept. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think failure happens when you don't act. But in reality, failure often happens when you quietly redefine what acting means. Take a simple work scenario. You sit down to complete a task that requires focus, something that could actually move your position forward. But instead of doing it directly, you start organizing files, replying to less important messages, preparing for the task instead of executing it. By the end of the day, you've been busy. But the one thing that mattered is untouched. You didn't avoid work, you avoided exposure. Because the real task carried a risk, effort without immediate reward, or worse, the possibility of not doing it perfectly. So you adjusted the standard. And that adjustment is what keeps you behind. Then there's the second mechanism, emotional substitution. You replace the discomfort of progress with the comfort of activity. Progress is usually quiet, repetitive, and often unrewarding in the moment. It doesn't feel exciting. It doesn't give you immediate validation. So your mind looks for something that does. You check your phone. You engage in small, easy wins. You complete tasks that give you a quick sense of closure. This creates a dangerous illusion. You feel productive without producing anything meaningful. A grounded example, someone trying to improve their physical health. They plan to train consistently. But instead of following through, they spend time researching workouts, watching fitness content, maybe even buying better equipment. It feels like progress. It looks like commitment. But their actual behavior hasn't changed. They've replaced physical effort with mental engagement. And over time, that substitution becomes their default pattern. This is why people stay stuck for years while believing they're trying. Because the feeling of trying has replaced the reality of doing. The third mechanism is slower, but more damaging, identity protection. You don't just avoid actions. You protect a version of yourself. If you fully commit and still fall short, you're forced to confront something uncomfortable. Maybe your current level isn't enough yet. Maybe you need to change more than you expected. Maybe the gap is bigger than you wanted to admit. So instead, you stay in partial effort. You try, but not completely. You show up, but not fully. This way, if results don't come, you still have an explanation. I could have done more. I wasn't really focused. Next time will be different. That explanation protects your ego. But it also locks your position. There was a small moment I remember clearly. Someone I knew kept saying they wanted to build a stable income stream outside their job. They had the skills. They had time in the evenings. But every time they sat down to work on it, they'd hesitate. They'd outline ideas, refine plans, adjust strategies, but never fully execute. One day, I asked them a simple question. If you worked seriously on this for 30 days and it didn't work, what would that mean? They paused. And then said, it would mean I'm not as capable as I thought. That was the real barrier. Not time. Not knowledge. Not opportunity. Identity protection. As long as they stayed in preparation mode, they never had to face a clear result. And that's how people remain behind, by avoiding the clarity that real effort brings. This is where the shift begins. You stop measuring yourself by intention, and you start measuring yourself by exposure. Did you face the task directly, without adjusting it? Did you remove the option to negotiate? Did you act before your mind had time to soften the requirement? This is what Rohn meant when he said, discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. But most people misunderstand that line. They think discipline is about intensity. It's not. It's about refusal, the refusal to lower the standard once it's set. Because every time you follow through exactly as planned, you send a signal to yourself, this is who I am. And every time you adjust it, even slightly, you send the opposite signal. Over time, those signals accumulate. Quietly. Consistently. Until they form a pattern you no longer question. So the real issue isn't that you're behind. It's that your current system produces delay as a default outcome. You hesitate. You negotiate. You substitute. You protect. And none of those feel like failure while they're happening. But together, they guarantee one thing: you stay exactly where you are, just with better explanations. The moment you remove those mechanisms, progress doesn't become easier, it becomes unavoidable. Because now there's no gap between what you decide and what you do. And once that gap closes, time starts working for you instead of against you. At this point, the problem should look different. You're not dealing with a lack of effort, You're dealing with a lack of alignment between what you decide and what you actually execute. And that gap isn't random. It's built through repeated permission to adjust, delay, and protect yourself from discomfort. So discipline stops being about pushing harder. It becomes about removing your ability to negotiate. Because every time you follow through exactly as planned, even when it's inconvenient, even when it feels unnecessary, you reinforce something deeper than progress. You reinforce identity. Not the version of you that talks, plans, or intends, but the version that executes without discussion. And that shift changes how time works. Most people think time is neutral. It's not. Time amplifies whatever system you're running. If your system includes hesitation, time multiplies delay. If your system includes consistency, time compounds results. That's the part people underestimate. Small actions, done without negotiation, don't just add up, they build momentum in a direction that becomes harder to stop. Not because it's exciting, but because it becomes normal. Consider financial discipline. Someone who tracks every expense daily doesn't feel dramatic change in a week. But over months, their awareness sharpens. Their decisions tighten. Waste reduces automatically. Not through force, but through accumulated clarity. The same applies to physical habits. A person who trains even when it feels average, not intense, not perfect, just consistent, builds a baseline that doesn't collapse under pressure. They don't rely on motivation because their standard no longer adjusts. This is where responsibility becomes practical. You stop asking, "Do I feel ready?" and start asking, "Did I do what I said I would do?" That question removes emotion from the process. And over time, answering it honestly builds something more stable than confidence. It builds self-respect. Not the kind based on outcomes, but the kind based on evidence. You can look at your actions and know, without exaggeration or excuse, that you followed through. That's where the shift locks in. Because once you see yourself as someone who executes, the idea of negotiation starts to feel out of place. Not impossible, just inconsistent with who you've become. And when that happens, discipline is no longer something you try to maintain. It's something you operate from. At the end of it, there's no mystery left. You're not behind because you lack potential. You're behind because your standards have been flexible in moments where they needed to be fixed. And once you see that clearly, the solution stops being complicated. You don't need a new system. You don't need more information. You don't need to feel different. You need to stop adjusting what you already decided. Because every time you follow through without negotiation, you close the gap a little more. Not dramatically. Not instantly. But permanently. And over time, that's what separates people who move forward from those who stay stuck with better explanations. They don't eliminate difficulty. They eliminate discussion. So the next time you set a standard, something simple, specific, and within your control, notice what happens when the moment comes to act. That hesitation you feel, that quiet urge to delay or adjust. That's the exact point where your position is decided. Not later. Not eventually. Right there. And if you remove the option to negotiate in that moment, you won't need to ask why you're behind anymore.